Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Maine Public All Books Considered Book Club. This is our inaugural event, and we'll be joined in just a few seconds by Meredith Hall, the first author to be selected. I want to tell everybody that, when you signed up for this, you might have thought it was going to be a Zoom event, and originally we intended it to be a Zoom event. The problem is Zoom can only handle about 500 people at a time, and we've had 1,700 people sign up for this book club, have read Meredith Hall's beautiful book, Beneficence, and have signed up to take part in this program. So welcome. Thank you for being part of a great, big, wonderful group of people who care about literature in Maine, who care about books in Maine. A few thank yous. I want to say thank you to DN Wealth Advisors and Bull Moose for being our sponsors, and also to so many of the bookstores who took part. Bookstacks in Bucksport, Left Bank Books in Belfast, Print in Portland, and Sherman's Maine Coast Bookshops among the bookstores to get a shout out today. I see Meredith with us. Meredith Hall, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Jen. I'm honored to be here with everybody. Thank you.
This is a novel that came out in the midst of a pandemic. I want to just ask you, obviously there's no way you could have known when you're writing it. Have you been surprised by the response, given the fact that we are in such a strange time right now?
We are in a strange time, and yes, I was very concerned about my book. Its launch was delayed by a while at the beginning into the fall because of the pandemic. Things like printers not being able to get enough paper. It was, things, people have been having a lot of trouble all along the way with everything, and books are no exception. And so I was very concerned. I also heard that bookstores are having a terrible time. Many of them were closed, trying to shift over to online sales. And I think bookstores are heroic, and they certainly have stepped up with heroism and have done everything they can to get new books out to their readers. And after a few months of really feeling pretty panicky that my book didn't have a chance in this pandemic, the response has been pretty extraordinary and very gratifying and very reassuring. I think my book is going to do okay. So
I think so. It's magnificent. It's such a beautiful, beautiful book. I'm only going to ask you a couple questions. So we're going to have you read some excerpts, and then we're going to go to the audience questions. And the reason is we already have so many, and we only have an hour with you, Meredith. But one of the big questions I had after reading this or during reading it is wondering how you chose the time, the late 40s, early 50s. I think about all the books out there about World War II and the World War II era, lots of books about the 60s, but this is sort of not a real popular time to place a piece of fiction. Is that the reason you chose it, or was there another reason?
I think that my instinct was to move to a time that represented a calm. And this is a family that lives on a very productive farm. They work very hard, a dairy farm along the coastal area of Maine. And this farm is a peaceful place. If they put in enough work and love this farm enough, it provides for them. And I think that time speaks to us about just that era, hard work and dedication to the land actually allowed farm families to do okay. And of course, that changed over time. There were a lot of pressures on those farm families. But the late 40s and into the 50s was a time, excuse me, that these farm families actually felt a time of, I think, of beneficence, a time of peace and well-being. And that was very attractive to me.
You chose to write this in alternating voices. Was that the decision from the beginning? And I just have to ask you, how hard is that?
I think it was not a decision right from the beginning. As I came to the idea of this book, what I knew was that I wanted to pay attention to a man who was a father and husband under difficult circumstances. Something awful happened in the family. And instead of stepping up and doing what he needed to do, I thought I was going to write a book about a man who fails terribly at that, a man who is selfish and self-absorbed. And what I wanted to know was how he accounted for his bad behavior, for those selfish decisions. I had come across a story similar to this, an event that happened in my town years ago, and it really sparked my imagination. And I thought, oh, I know this man. I want to write. I really want to explore how he understands this selfishness and these decisions that are harmful to his family. When I started, I thought he was going to be the speaker, but somehow Doris showed up and she immediately started this book. She just showed up. She had a name and she showed up and started talking. And in that first chapter, what she does is introduce us to her husband, Tup. And he is, in fact, nothing like the man that I imagined I was going to write a book about. So everything changed. As soon as Doris started speaking, I understood that I had it all wrong and that I needed to listen very carefully to Doris and then to Tup and then to the children in this family.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I could ask you questions for the whole hour, but I won't be selfish. Why don't you read to us a passage from Beneficence?
Okay, I thought I would read something in Tup's voice. Tup is the father and the husband. Tup is a very good man. We know in the early sections of this book that he is a very hardworking man and deeply devoted to his wife and to his children. In fact, he and his wife are very much in love still. And he's confident in that sense of himself, that he's a good man. But here in this scene, I wanted to suggest a capacity that I think each of us carries to perhaps fall down on those ideas we have about ourselves and how good we are. So this is Tup speaking. Last winter, on a cold, clear, early January day, Doris and I organized our chores so we could take the afternoon skating with the children on Johns River in South Brookfield. The ice was thick, and we had had no snow since the cold weather really set in, so the ice was smooth and open. I truly loved to skate, and the day felt as exciting to me as to my children. This was the place my father brought his own children when the drudgery of his work life overwhelmed him in the dark early days of winter. That's not what drove me there. Not too much work or the wrong work, but everyone needs a sense of cutting free once in a while, and Doris was quick to say yes. She and Dodie put together thermoses of hot chocolate, and Beston and Sonny brought the sled from the shed. They waxed the steel runners with a candle stub and tied a new length of rope to the steering bar. All our outer clothes went behind the truck seat. Dodie got the place beside me and my hand, and the truck filled with happy nonsense and chatter. Johns River is really just a wide, slow creek with overhanging trees and brush protecting muskrat and beaver bank dens. I've always thought it was a very good place, especially for children, because it spools out forward, not like a pond or lake surrounding you, but a river of ice inviting you away. I love that illusion, that sense of the possibility of going on and away, turning your back and giving yourself over to what you can't see ahead. The muddy landing was frozen, and someone, probably a trapper, had laid a good log down for sitting and a stone break for a small fire. Doris and I helped tighten the laces on the children's skates, Sonny always in new ones, and Dodie and Beston in his hand-me-downs. Dodie complained at the start of each winter about wanting figure skates like her mother's, but she had mastered hockey skates and seemed content once she got on the ice the first time each year. I seldom see Doris in slacks, but I complimented her, saying, "Well, Mr. Center, you are looking very handsome today." I could count on her to laugh, and the children too. "Oh, but I change into a beautiful princess at midnight," she said, with her open smile, "if a handsome prince decides to kiss me. My wife is a flirt, which no man ever complains about." Off we went, the sun glinting from the ice and the bare trees and the blue sky itself, I was happy the minute my skates hit the ice. This is something we never forget, the feeling of ice carved by our skates with a rasping swoosh. It is a certain kind of freedom to not make steps, but instead to slide a leg forward, the other leg, the first again, and find yourself suddenly almost free of the world, skimming smoothly and effortlessly into the light. I felt a kind of euphoria, a real elation, and wondered for a minute if my children knew this kind of freedom yet. We circled each other, Beston reaching sometimes for Doris's hand or mine, Sonny and Dodie breaking away and swooping along, their arms outstretched, their faces receiving the clean winter light. No one spoke or called out, our skate blades scraping loudly. The children dragged the sled down onto the ice and took turns, two of them stepping into the loop of rope like a harness and pulling the third fast along the river in wide sweeping arcs. And now they shrieked and laughed and taunted one another. I watched Doris pull out of their way and start her silent remembering of a girl's ballet on ice, the twirls and little leaps and hips swishing side to side to go backward. She smiled, embarrassed to be watched, but didn't stop, which pleased me. And I turned away and did my own remembering, the boy hard at hockey roaring low across the ice, feet pointing out to catch the ice and drive the body forward, faster and faster. And when I gained a curve in the river, suddenly the sounds behind me became muffled, and I slowly straightened and focused on the simple, smooth glide of skates on good ice, the memory so strong I had nothing to say about it. And I lifted my face to the sun and swoosh, 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 swoosh in rhythm. I followed the shining ice. The noise and shouts fell behind me. Daddy, Daddy, where are you going? Dodie called. And the memory of skating and this moment of skating became the same act, and I was gone. I let myself be gone. Dodie's call left behind. I went forward and I was alone. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sun was ahead of me. Nothing was behind me. There were no needs and no expectations and nothing waiting for me. The river curved right and left and farther right. A river laid here for me alone. A crow called from the top of a towering old stave oak, and the sun shone purple against him. I did not rush, taking the river as mine, the silence as mine, the emancipating light as mine, my legs strong and the cold air now stinging my lungs, all mine with nothing secluding me or hindering me or binding me, and so I did not stop. John's river whined smaller and smaller, and finally I knew that I had come a very long way from my responsibilities, and I felt a pang of worry that grew as I turned and pushed my way back. Now it felt like hard work, and the worry grew to a guilt that was crushing and that I resented and resisted. The light had changed, a warning. And so I found my family seated on the log, the day gone and cold, the hot drinks gone, the truck keys in my pocket. Doris said nothing, and I resented that too. The children told me that they were frightened that I had gone through the ice, and I said sharply, I didn't go through the ice. I have more sense than that. We rode home in silence with no one's hand in mine, and although I knew that was a child's rebuke, I was not filled with sorrow about it as I might have been. Where had I gone, I wondered, that felt so distant from this family I love and so sovereign? We are always forgiven, and we made our way again and then again to an afternoon of skating, but we never returned to John's River, as if keeping me from it would preserve us from some sort of sundering.
You know, Meredith, when I first read that passage, I didn't think of it this way, but now that I've completed the whole book, I'm wondering if your foreshadowing was intentional there.
I think, when I write, I don't have a plan about the future. I just write what is coming at the moment. But I think that I definitely understood that Tup has the capacity to turn away from his family. He is so dedicated to them. This is really a complication in him. that he also has the capacity to skate his way away from them, symbolically maybe, but also later in the book, quite reality.
I'm going to go to a question from Brian Crabtree. He writes, to what extent do you think the personalities in Beneficence are specific to the location in Maine? I'm thinking particular of Doris and how she finds it difficult or even unacceptable to express anger or other negative emotions. This seemed to inhibit her ability to process tragedy and adapt.
I do think that Doris is I think these people are very much a product of their time. And I think they are also very much a product of the kind of life that they are living. Farm people, rural people in Maine value privacy and a kind of erasure of the self's needs. And we've entered a time where sharing events in our lives and our feelings about them are actually, that's celebrated. It's seen as something that we should aspire to, that we should open up in that way. That was not the life these people lived. None of their neighbors, none of their townspeople would have felt that it was comfortable for Doris or Tup to speak about the grief that they were feeling after this terrible event. They are burdened with the aloneness of that, and their community would have expected that aloneness. This is something you handle on your own, and you keep it private. Even if private means that you don't even come to town, you keep that world private. And it's not, I don't think that I've never felt that there's a harshness in that. It's just a very old-fashioned honoring in many ways of our individual strengths and our right to privacy. I think
and here's a related question then. How much more resilient do you think this family would have been in a culture with more community and intergenerational support? The story seemed to show the limitations of a nuclear family in a society that holds up individualism and self-reliance as ideals.
I think that's a really great and interesting question. I do think that these people, if they lived in the 21st century, they have so many strengths. This is a profoundly bonded family. They like each other. They not only love each other very much, but they like each other. They enjoy each other's company enormously. And they are also deeply rooted on this beautiful, beautiful land. They are really who they are, and how they love each other is inseparable from their life on this land and their work together on this land. I do think that question is very interesting. I think if they had lived in a time when help was offered freely and comfortably, if they understood that their community of people expected to help them, of course they couldn't do this alone. I do think that language, that the nuclear family, these events do show the terrible limitations of a nuclear family in the face of tragedy, even when that nuclear family is a very, very successful family under other circumstances. That's a great question. Very interesting.
Don asks, I was quite impacted and moved by the story of the farm within the narrative. It felt like the farm was a main character in which the author did character development. Please explain how the author came to know so much about this, researched and developed the character of the farm within the overall narrative. Meredith, I happen to know that you did not grow up on a farm. So anyone who has read your memoir without a map knows that you didn't grow up on a farm. How did you get to understand farm life? Did you interview people who lived in farms on Maine in the 50s?
Perhaps I should have, but I did not. I did not. I don't really understand why that farm life felt so simply and profoundly familiar to me. I'm a Yankee through and through. I've lived in northern New England in rural areas all my life. I know rural people. I know the farm life as part of any community. I think Maine people know farmers. We're familiar with that world, but I don't think we know the details of it. I certainly didn't. There were things that I needed to do research. I looked at some books and did online research about very specific information. I needed to know, for instance, where would Tup have sold his milk in 1947 or 1951? How was milk handled in a rural area? And I discovered that there were co-ops, dairy farms formed co-ops. I needed to know how old calves were when they were castrated. I somehow understood how they were castrated. I docked tails of a lot of sheep in my childhood and raising my own sons. We had sheep and chickens. So I docked a lot of sheep tails, and I guess I thought it couldn't be far different from that. It turned out it's not, but I didn't know the timing of that. There were certain things like that that I needed to look up. I needed to look up terminology about equipment on the farm. I understood tedding. I know what a tedder looks like. It's a really beautiful piece of equipment. But I wasn't certain about spreading manure on the fields and how that would be loaded into the spreader and then how it actually moves from the spreader out onto the fields. There were things like that that I needed to know. But there was really an uncanny sense for me that this was home, that I was describing a life that I somehow have always known. I've always wished that I grew up on a farm, a Maine farm. And I wonder sometimes if maybe I have in another life, because it is a strangely familiar life for me.
So I have a question. This one happens to come from Kelly Pennington, but I have to tell you, Meredith, a lot of people have asked this similar question. How did the bullet get in the gun that killed Sonny?
Yeah. Do you know, I think that we need to remember that in the late 40s, the awareness of guns in the house would have been completely different. It would have been absent. Men would have protected their hunting guns. They would have been hung on a rack. I assume they would have been, or in a case maybe, I assume they would have been kept empty of ammunition. I guess, I would think so. But this was an old pistol. This had been around for generations. It was a very old-fashioned pistol and functioned differently than pistols would have in the mid-1900s when this story took place. And Tup had grown up with his siblings and his friends playing with this gun. It had never been seen as a threat. It was just an artifact banging around the house. And on that day, something terribly, just something awful went wrong. And it catalyzed the entire story. That was the moment that this entire story took off. I think that the tragedy for Tup and Doris is that they not only knew the terrible grief of losing one of their children, but it was a very gory death. It was a very violent and gory death. And they had a lot of familiarity with that violence. And it was very visual and must have stayed with them for the rest of their lives. So I think a lot of their response was not just to the loss, but to the conditions of the loss. And also a lot of their response was that question. Each of them, including, including Dodie, circled again and again and again. What was my responsibility? I am guilty. I caused this. Dodie wonders whether she actually touched the gun at the wrong moment and she might have made it go off. Doris and Tup wonder, how could I have allowed this to be in the house and to be played with? But the circumstances were very different at that time, late 40s. It was just a toy. That's all it was, just a toy.
And that's, of course, one of the most heartbreaking things is that everyone blames themselves.
Yes.
Do you have the energy to read one more passage?
Yes, absolutely. I actually like going back into this book and reading. I care very much about these people in this place, and reading from it allows me to visit with them a little bit. It's quite nice, actually. I like it. So this is in Dodie's voice. In this passage, she's 16 years old. This tragedy has happened. It's behind them. A great deal has been asked of Dodie by both her mother and her father. By the time she's 16, she has this event happened 4 years before, when Beston was a very little boy. He's now in elementary school, upper elementary school. He's still a little boy. He's very much Dodie's little brother. She has ended up, because Doris has, as Maine people say, Doris has gone into herself. She has really left the world and her responsibilities to her children and her husband. And the trauma has sent her so deeply into herself that she is barely functioning. She cooks, and that's really it. So Dodie, her daughter, has had to pick up all of the household responsibilities. And Tup needs a farm wife, and considers selling the farm, and Dodie protests, I can do this. So she's an excellent student. She's studying Latin in school and loves it, takes her studies very seriously, but she also takes care of Beston, takes care of all the laundry, all of the housework, this vast garden, the chickens, separating the milk. She's taken over all Doris's milk duties. This is a very overburdened girl. So she is speaking to us. Marion, excuse me, Marion is a friend. Marion always moves over when our afternoon bus picks up the younger children, so Beston can sit down beside me. He is so thin, he looks like a smaller boy, smaller than the other boys in his grade, and watchful, apart. Each time he comes into the new life I am making, and we meet again, brother and sister, and we start back home to this other world. Each time I feel a rush of protectiveness. He trusts me. That trust sits hard on me and makes me lonely. We sit side by side and make our way across the 6 miles that return us to our beautiful island of such light and such dark. Yesterday, he asked quietly if we could walk home from his school together in the afternoon. He sometimes asks this, and each time I feel I have to say no. I have so many chores to do, Best, and then so much homework. I need to get home, I say. But yesterday morning, the second cut of hay gleamed in the early light, the green stretching across our land, across and beyond the creek and the orchard, across the road on the other side to the ledges. That shining grass speaks of more work coming for Dad and Best, the cutting and raking and tedding and baling and hauling to the barn and hoisting to the lofts, the timing critical before frost takes the grass. But that is not my work. And while I stood at the kitchen sink looking out on our land, I felt for the first time in a very long time the simple and perfect beauty of our land, its beneficence. And I said yes to Beston, tomorrow. I got off the bus at the little school, and we took the route so familiar to us across the Munford's fields, shutting the gates behind us as we moved down the long slope to our stream, Center Creek, our creek, and followed it to the rocks where the bugs collect. Beston held my hand in the privacy of this big land, a boy too old for this, and still a necessity. The sun and cool air swept us clean. Mr. Munford's black cows watched us without caring. I felt patient and contented lying next to Beston as he searched for bugs in the creek. We used our thermoses to hold them. Everything is known to us in this place. We carry it inside us. I believe Sonny carried it inside him. My father says that we have no choice but to believe in God, that we have no evidence against him. I think we surely do. Daddy says that God doesn't pay attention to each of us, that he gave us this grace and it is up to us to be human inside it. Everything is here for us, he says. But why would God allow us to suffer? I ask my father. I think he says that he doesn't allow suffering. He provides it. It is a vital part of the great gift. I resist this. I have not found one thing better coming from suffering than from happiness. If heaven waits for us, then a place of no suffering is the prize. Daddy says heaven is here with us now. He tells me, Dodie, you don't know this yet, but you are forming around all that you have known, and you are going to be a very large person. God is in you. Lying with my brother by the creek that runs through our farm and onto the sea that is waiting for it, lying in this sun, in this soft wind, stirring my fingers among myriad creatures none of us can ever imagine. I might believe in my father's God. But then Beston holds a back swimmer in his small palm, and his eyes lift to mine, and here in this sun and this wind and this growing green grass, here by this noisy shallow stream named for us, is the face of unspeakable sorrow carved forever into a little boy. Here is the absence of our brother, a child himself, and I am certain there can be no God. But I did not speak of these questions with Beston. Instead, I admired the back swimmers and the mayfly nymphs and the crane fly larvae he offered for my appreciation. Hemiptera and Ephemeroptera and Diptera, he said, Latin, the poetry of these names belonging to me in a new way. This was respite. Beston smiled at the little creatures he found as if he were greeting them. Hello, I have missed you all. We are back. And so we accepted this peace. My father is right in this part of it, that we receive great gifts. I know this too. Beston and I lay in the damp grass all afternoon, warmed by the sun. After supper, he poured the water and his strange creatures into a big bowl, and my father carried it to the old table on the screen porch. Beston lifted each one onto a piece of cardboard and let the water soak away. When they have dried out, he will make a small card for each one in the tiny handwriting he has learned, and he will add them to the others that Sonny once found. If Beston attached any sentiment to this dying, he does not show it. When he went to bed, Daddy lay down for his nap before leaving for the mill. My mother came up to her room, nodding to each of us as she passed her doors. The sun and the creek and the familiar walk and the black cows and the constant sound of water heading to its home and the Latin names and the intricacy of legs and gills and feathery antennae had entered the house with Beston and me, a balm, a remembrance, a thread stitching us to Sonny, to this family life before, and we slept. I heard my father return to his room before dawn. When we rose with the light, my father was waking from his early morning nap. It was Saturday, a day filled with its usual necessities and obligations, an armature we rely on. I felt free all day. Beston asked if we could walk home again on Monday. I said, maybe, we'll see. Maybe, like a great promise to us. Maybe we can go over to the ledges next time, I said, and see if anything is denning in the rocks. We could ride our bikes to the pond, Beston said. Yes, we'll see how much work I have. The great trees at the front of the house stood over my work all day, their cool shade dappling the walls inside and out in the fall breeze. I felt prepared, ready. The sense that a dark train was heading at me from somewhere unseen was gone for a time. No surprises. I am Dodie Center. I am 16 years old. I help my father run our farm. I have a little brother. I attend Sheldon High School. Every day I choose to try to do good. Much of the garden is harvested and put away for the winter. I will not forget again that we can walk across this land in all its constancy and return more certain.
Thank you. Meredith, I'm going to read a question that I think is appropriate after hearing that reading. This is from Alicia in Wyndham. Dear Meredith, thank you for your amazing book. Your pacing is exquisite and powerful. I'm wondering if it took restraint and/or conscious patience. Were you ever tempted to rush through a moment, or emotional process? If so, how did you slow yourself down?
These are wonderful questions. I think that the pacing of this book is reflective of the pacing of the people living in this book. And I felt an understanding of the pacing of the work and the pacing of the play. Their play is, for the most part, very quiet. And there is a general quiet and peace and calm on this farm where they play and where they work. And I think there's something hushed, that idea of beneficence. This is a place for me of beneficence. This is a place where quiet goodness resides. And these people, before this very, very tough event slammed into their lives, they participated in that beneficence. And I think for them, it was a quiet and a paced and a patient kind of life. So I think that I was listening to them more than making decisions about whether there needed to be, whether I needed to be slow in any particular part.
Elizabeth says, did you draw a map of the land? It's so vivid. And a map of the towns and the land around. I almost wanted to draw it out because I could almost see it. Thanks, Elizabeth.
That's wonderful. I'm really, really pleased to hear that. That's just great. I didn't have a map on paper, but I did study the land. I did learn the land as I wrote it. I needed to orient the house. Somehow north, south, east, west is always important to me anyway. And I needed to orient the house, and the trees needed to be in the front of the house. So many old Maine farms have those trees planted for the bride and groom. I needed to understand the layout of the cornfields and the pastures, the orchard, the rise on the pine hill beyond the orchard, the ledges across the street. This house is on a very small dirt road that really goes nowhere. It ends in the fields of the last farm beyond them. So they are the people living at the end of the field. Nobody lives at the end of this road. Nobody lives beyond them. And so I needed to imagine how that road makes its way back to town. But I came to feel deeply oriented to this life that they were living in, this farm that they were building. I needed to turn to them, I think, and have them show me, no, this is where the orchard is, and this is where the ledge is. As those stories came, I needed to add them to my sort of mental map. So it pleases me very much that mental map had enough clarity that readers can sense this place.
Another question about place here. This is from Patty. Is Allstead based on a real Maine town? I'm guessing Pownal or Durham or Bowdoin. I'm the granddaughter of a Maine dairy farmer. So appreciated your choice of setting and family. Thank you for a beautiful book.
I did not create this town on any specific town. I consciously made the decision that I wanted people, especially Maine people familiar with our beautiful state, I wanted them to be separate from what they had known. I wanted them to be able to enter this completely fictitious place and have these completely fictitious events occur in a story. I wanted it to be real story. And so I wasn't disguising a particular town. That mid-coast of Maine, this farm is within driving distance of the shore. In one scene, the family goes down and plays at dusk on a beach. And in another scene, Top takes the children on a cold March night down to the end of Center Creek, where their creek empties out into the bay, and they go smelting there. So the farm was within reasonable driving distance of the shore, but it was not a particular place. I'm very familiar with that mid-coast area just in from the coast, and I'm sure that was my model. I don't think that this fits well out in the foothills or farther north or farther east, down east. So I think it's someplace in that mid-coast area of Maine, but it's not a place that really exists.
So Patty's guess was probably close.
Close, yeah, I would say, yes.
Yeah. Mary Agnes Gilman says, why do we only hear from Tup, Doris, and Dodie? Many people ask why we don't hear from Beston.
So when I made that decision, Beston at the beginning of this book is a very little boy, and he's a little boy. And I felt that at that time, he really he wouldn't be able to satisfy an adult reader's desire to know something from each of these people. There's only that child, both in the innocence before this event and the tragedy after this event. That child can only say and understand, or understand and say certain things. And just the vocabulary is limited. So I made the decision that Beston would not have a voice. I couldn't figure out a way to bring him in later. By the time that might have happened, this rhythm of Doris and then Dodie and then Tup is deeply established in the book. And I just felt that Beston couldn't step in at the point where he finally actually could add to this story. I like Beston because I like him for many reasons, but he is such an interior child. He's a very gentle and very interior child. He's a mysterious child for his parents. They love him and like him and respect him and they honor him. But there's a lot that they don't understand. And I think that even as he grows older in this book, he stuns the family and I think himself by discovering that he has music in him, a lot of music and really good music. He has a real gift for this. And I think that speaks of what else we don't know about Beston. I will say, a lot of people, even without people asking about Beston, he's the silent boy. He's the child who never says anything to us, really. Dodie often reports what Beston says or reports what Beston does or interprets Beston's emotional state for us, but he really does not speak to us. And because of that, he is very curious to me. I have a strong instinct to go back and write Beston into life and find out who he is. I'd love to have him reveal himself to me and maybe to you all too. Maybe that will happen.
Rachel writes, all of the characters were genuine and relatable. Is there a character that Meredith identifies with more than others? I really enjoyed the book, Rachel.
Thank you. These are just wonderful questions. A character I identify more with. For some reason, Tup was more knowable to me. His kind of erratic responses after this event, the struggle that he faces. He's very self-knowing. He's self-examining. As he makes bad and selfish decisions, he can talk to himself about why he's doing that. And that was quite familiar to me. I'm not sure why, but I understood Tup's motives. Tup loved Doris very, very much. And if at any time in his life he needed the love of his wife and the reassurance of his wife, he carries great guilt and great sorrow for the harm he's caused his wife and his children. And he needs Doris, and she is absolutely unable to meet him on that. And somehow I could intuit what that felt like for Tup and why he might make the decisions that he made. Doris, because she's a mother, Doris's sorrow is recognizable to me. How does a mother face the loss of a child? I could imagine Doris's sense of loss and her profound experience of loss. I think now we would talk about Doris's process of this expression, going into herself. We would call that now profound depression. It went on for a long time. It stayed with her for a very long time. She had a very, very difficult time making her way back to herself and to her family. I understood the depth of that grief. I felt it. I felt the pain with Doris. I have been very blessed not to be a person who has struggled with depression in my own life. It's not something I know personally. And so how depression looks, how it feels for Doris had to be a guess for me. I had to make my way through it and try to allow her, writers often talk about characters teaching us and leading us. Doris definitely taught me. It felt as if I gave her free rein, and on every page, Doris said, "Okay, Meredith, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. This is what I'm going to do, and these are the things I can't do. I cannot find my way back to that. You might wish I could, but I can't do that. I'm not going to do that." I very often, writing this book, had the experience of I don't work with any kind of plan. I went into this with no plan at all. All I knew was that a very difficult event was going to hit this family, and the father, Tup, was going to behave badly, and we were going to look at that bad behavior. Immediately that fell apart. So the only thing that got left was that a very difficult event was going to hit a very well integrated family, a family that had known love and safety in each other. And I was going to watch how that worked. Day after day after day, I came to this writing with some sort of plan about what was going to happen. And these people simply refused to do and be any of the things that I had planned. Every day was a surprise. And I learned that I really needed to enter this writing in a very, very deep and profound way and hand myself over to it. There was a lot I needed to learn in this book.
Deep and profound is evident. I'm going to go to an email from Mark in South Portland. There were a couple things he was bothered by. And the one thing that I'll bring up here is he said he's talking about Tup's abandonment of his other family. Mark says that doesn't square with his supposedly deep family connection to Doris, Dodie, and Beston. Mark finds that a disturbing outcome and unrealistic. Tell me about coming to that decision and how Tup took you there.
I think it is a shocking event. I think it is a very shocking event. He not only abandons Helen, which is unconscionable, trying desperately to have her understand the terms on which he believes he entered her life. And of course, the term she understood, although there were some limitations, she understood that there were limitations, but she did not understand the circumstances of Tup's life or the limitations that he was bringing to her. And she certainly did not understand those things when the child is born, and that child is the innocent. The child has nothing to do with any of these circumstances. And Tup's decision to walk away from this child, making vague, hopeful statements that she will forgive him, and suggesting a little bit later with Dodie that he hopes that she will find him, and if she does, he will welcome her. These are desperate failures on the part of Tup, and I wanted them to be. I think personally they're very human. Tup needed Doris and his, what he considered his real children. That's what he wanted. And he found this other life because he could not hold on to, he did not have in sufficiency that life that he needed and loved so desperately. So Helen and this child were always a fallback. The child was not planned, and Helen was a fallback. He always saw her and understood her as a fallback. And as soon as things finally started turning around at home, with Dodie's graduation and her life with Daniel and the steadiness that Daniel brings to this family, a kind of young man's wisdom that he brings. And finally, Doris re-entering her own life. She comes back finally. And as soon as she does that, Tup is back in that world. He is deeply in love with Doris. He was never in love with Helen. And he returns to the world that he has been so desperate for. I hope that the reader finds this very problematic. I think it is. I'm not sure. For me, it's not unrealistic. We make terrible decisions in the face of love and its loss. I think that we fail at love. This book looks at the grace of love, the gift that we receive from love, and its terrible failures and costs. And I think Tup, in that last decision, has behaved in a very human way. This is where this man claims selfishly what he wants. And confusingly, what he wants is to hold that original family intact. So it is complicated territory. For me, it's morally complicated, and I want it to be morally complicated.
Linda wants to know, are you considering having your book made into a film?
It's an interesting question. I've had there's been talk about my book being a film. And I actually think it would be a beautiful film. I think that writers are always wary of what will happen to their work when it moves from the page to the screen. I think writers really lose that book. It's not theirs anymore, and anything can happen with it. So I would be very wary of that. But as a writer, somebody commented on the map of this place. This is already, for me, a film. I see it so clearly. It has, there's sound to this film, and the specificity of it, and the specificity of all of these small events that happen. Each of these people, each of our narrators is a great storyteller. They revel in saying, once this happened. One day, one winter day, one summer day, one day when Daddy and Beston were haying, one day when Mom and I were in the garden. They are great storytellers, and those vignettes seem to me to be quite filmed. So I think it would make an interesting and very beautiful film. Whether it would be good film or not, I don't know. And what that process is like for a writer, I don't know. I really don't have an answer to that.
Susan wants to know, miscarriage or self-abortion?
Mm-hmm. For me, as the writer, that was a self-abortion. That was a decision that Dodie made. And it was a gruesome decision. It was a trigger for the whole family to relive the gruesomeness of the death that they had experienced. And Dodie tells us, I did not protect my brother, and I'm afraid I won't be able to protect any child. She's expressing a terrible doubt that she could possibly be a mother, be a successful mother. She certainly has a model in her own mother of a mother who is not protecting her remaining children. And I think that Dodie carries a great fear that all the mothering that she's doing to her little brother, Beston, will not be sufficient. And so she's filled with a feeling that it's vital that she not become a mother. And she goes to terrible lengths to do that, primitive lengths. She's very lucky to be able to go on to have children. So Thomas is a great gift to the entire family. It's really a pivotal moment when Dodie makes this decision. It is Daniel in that bedroom finally rising up with a voice. He's been so quiet and so steady. And it's her husband, Daniel, who really chides Doris and Tup in a very, very strong way, saying, you need to, and his wife, you need to all stop this. Nobody is guilty. this was an accident. You need to call it what it was. It was a tragedy. And those words, so heartfelt, seem to allow this family to finally break free of the cage that they had put around themselves because of their sense of guilt and irreconcilable loss. And it's actually, in a strange way, it's Dodie's decision to give herself an abortion and to lose this child that is the catalyst for this next moment in the book. So,
Meredith, I'm glad you mentioned Daniel, because I have to say I was so relieved that he turned out to be a good guy. Yes. When he first came in, I was a little worried.
Yes, he was in that room. And he is clearly a damaged boy. Dodie shares with us that he does not come from a very strong family. And yet there's something about the centers that he responds to. He is the center child in a way, although an in-law. He's the center child that maintains a bridge to top when during those, excuse me, during those years that Dodie and Beston feel such anger with their father. It is Daniel who maintains that connection and that link for the good of the rest of the family. But he's a good guy. He's a very, very good choice for Dodie. Marion, her friend, had to kind of push her around a little bit and say, what are you thinking? You think you're going to find a better man than Daniel? What are you thinking? So Dodie goes ahead and she makes this good decision.
Sue Sage asks, she says on page 157, the date of the tragedy is given, March 3rd. Then on page 253, Sonny's headstone reads the date of death is March 26th. Is there a reason for this discrepancy?
Oh, ouch, no. No, it was an instant death. I need to return to those pages and my notes and find out if that has been transcribed improperly. A paperback is coming out in August. We'll have a chance to correct that. No, the death was instantaneous. And there was a long period of time when there was no stone, but longer than that. So that must just be an error on the page. I really apologize, readers. I have pored over this, and a wonderful copy editor and a wonderful Josh Bodwell, my absolutely gifted and wonderful editor at Godine Publishing, has pored over this book, and perhaps we've all missed this. So I appreciate you pointing it
out. Let's see here. Somebody here, Mary Margaret Nay, wants to ask a question I want to ask. So I'm going to ask this. I got the feeling, and this will probably be our last, well, maybe not our last, second to last question. I got the feeling at the end of the book that Beston has a lot to say. You've mentioned this. If you're not working on a sequel, what are you writing now?
I've been very busy with this book, and it takes a long time to close the covers of a book, say goodbye to it, and move into new work. It's a very big move, and I have to find my next story and my next people. And I think about this every day, and so far, I'm in the thinking stage. I have not started that writing, but I have to say, I've never imagined myself as a writer who would be interested in a sequel. I'm not a reader who's interested in sequels, so I'm not sure what that would look like, but I am very interested in Beston. I feel some sort of obligation to give him a voice and let him talk to us.
So, how about if you don't call it a sequel, but just write a book with Beston, yes, an older Beston?
Yes, right. Marilyn Robinson does this, right? We meet characters again and again, so maybe we'll do that.
Well, it's been such a joy, Meredith. Congratulations again. A treat for me to be the conduit between all of these readers who have so loved Beneficence. And thank you for being our inaugural author.
Thank you so much. I am deeply honored to help All Books Considered launch. It's been really a privilege for me and a joy to know that so many people signed in tonight and were part of the conversation. Thank you very much.
And thank you to the sponsors at the bottom of the page there, Dayan and Bull Moose. And thank you to everybody who was behind this idea. Clearly something everybody has enjoyed so much. Again, Meredith Hall, congratulations. The book is beneficent. Paperback coming out soon, but you don't have to wait. You can get the hardback now.
Thank you very much, Jen. That was wonderful. Thank you.